Good evening, everybody. You're very welcome to this, our FirstWeds of the autumn. My name is Mark Cumming, and I'm with COLOV, the Association of Development Workers and Volunteers. We organise these FirstWeds series, those of you that know COLOV, to connect up the local and the global. Those who have an interest in international development issues and have an experience in the Global South, to connect them back into activism in Ireland. And those who have an interest in justice issues here in Ireland, to connect up their work with international solidarity work. So we're delighted to partner with the Department of International Development in hosting these FirstWeds. And we're delighted for the first time, maybe I'll be corrected, but we've organised a theme to run through the autumn-winter FirstWeds, which is around COP. And obviously the major issue that is being looked at over this time. And we're delighted to have youth voices, Indigenous elder voices later in the autumn, and then community activist voices after the COP. And we hope we're getting to include voices that aren't normally in the spotlight. So do like us on YouTube. Do post in comments tonight in the YouTube comment box, and they'll be fed to our moderator, and enjoy the night. And without any further ado, I'll hand you over to Eilish Dillon, the Director of the Development Studies Department in Maynooth, who's our moderator. And good luck to the panel tonight. Thank you.
Thanks a million, Mark. It's really great to be back at First Wednesdays, and to I'd like to welcome everyone to this month's event, The Future Is Now, Global Youth Voices on the Climate Crisis. And when we think of climate change, climate justice, or the COP talks in Glasgow in a few weeks' time, so often, as we know, it can become like blah, 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 as Greta Thunberg said last week, rhetoric sounding good, but no change. Or it can be all too big, too overwhelming to seem possible to change. Or it's something that we should be tackling, but not governments or corporations. Or talked about in a way that we can keep going the way we've always been going, but we just need to tweak things a little bit, change a few things, still consume, but just consume greener, a green economy approach, or get all the global leaders into the room at the same time to agree commitments, but only to leave and renege on their payback for years of exploitation to those most vulnerable to the effects of climate change. So we're going to look at some of these issues about what do we need to do? How can we manage to address climate change, even though it seems that the time has already run out? How can we build a future for people and the planet, one that requires radical transformation of our way of life, of all the decisions that we make, and the ways in which these decisions are made, whose voices are heard, and whose time it is now to listen, and to whom. And I'm really delighted that we have three really interesting contributors to our discussions this evening, and they will be delighted to hear from you if you have any questions from them, and I'd be happy to put those questions to them later. For those of you who've been with us at these First Wednesdays before, you'll know it's very informal. I'll basically ask our three panelists a few simple questions, giving them an opportunity to share with us their experience, their insights, even maybe their struggles and their hopes for the future. So as I say, I'm delighted to welcome our three panelists who've come from Ireland, from Rwanda, and from Canada. So I'm going to just introduce them to you first. Some of you will have read their blogs, read the profiles on the notice for tonight's event. But I'll just tell you a little bit about them, and then I'll ask them a few questions. And please really engage with this evening. We're delighted that you're here to join us, and look forward to the event. So the first person is Amy O'Brien. She uses she/her pronouns. She's a 16-year-old activist and advocate with Fridays for Future, Girl Up International, and Youth Against Racism and Inequalities. She's a youth writer with Spun Out and is host of the Sustainable Sleepover Club podcast, which is available online. She's also the chair of Cork County Corlin and Og and an organizer of Climate Assembly ERA. Ineza Umahosa Grace is an ecofeminist, impact-driven actor in the climate change and environmental protection sector, serving the global community based in Rwanda. She holds a bachelor degree in water and environmental engineering from the University of Rwanda, which shaped her engagement in climate justice by contributing and allowing her to contribute on a national and international level. In 2017, she started the Rwandan youth NGO, The Green Fighter. And with a team of 10 young people, they engage in project design and implementation, environmental education, and advocacy. In 2020, she co-founded the Loss and Damage Youth Coalition, which aims to create a borderless youth partnership to seek climate justice through taking action on loss and damage. And I'll be asking her a little bit about that later on. And Swakwas Dunstan Moore, and Swakwas translates to sunshine in English. You'll see that on her Zoom there. Swakwas is an Indigenous youth from Lytton in British Columbia and Canada. She is in Mooks and Yakama. She holds the position as one of the community climate justice coordinators on the climate team at Videa and is a member of the youth advisory group at the Canadian Commission for UNESCO. And Swakwas, I'd like to ask you about that later on as well, and apologies for the mistakes in the pronunciation. So again, welcome to all of you, and it's great to be here as part of the team at the Department of International Development at Maynooth University, and to be working with Colov again on the First Wednesdays this year. So I'd just like to start really by asking you all, if you wouldn't mind, and maybe we'll start with you, Swakwas, if you wouldn't mind. Just tell us, how did you get involved in this area of work and action? What was it that really spurred you to do something, I suppose, to try and change the way things are?
Yeah, I've always been interested in the climate crisis ever since a young age. When in Lytton, prior to the train bridge they have now, it was a very dangerous, only a couple of feet high wooden walking bridge. And that walking bridge was the main transportation to one side of town to the other. And during the summer, when it was getting hotter, the river would rise. So the ferry that connected the two sides would be out. So you'd have to walk across this train bridge. And it was very dangerous then. It's still dangerous now, but they have updated a bit. So that was really what got me interested in the first place. And then this past summer, I call it my villain origin story, because on June 30th, it's called the Lytton Creek Fire, and it burnt down 90% of Lytton. So it was a wildfire. I'm still currently evacuated. That's why I'm staying in this hotel. But that, even prior to that, that was my villain origin story, I call it, to really start holding governments and corporations accountable to this current crisis we're in.
Great. Well, thanks very much for telling us about that. That's such a shocking and a devastating experience to have gone through. I was going to ask you, until you told us about Lytton, I was going to ask you about the bridge and how you made the connection with the bigger issues. I'm quite clear, I guess, but you can tell us a little bit more about, how those connections were made between the experience, that terrible experience of the fire in your town, and these broader issues, are linking it to government and holding corporations to account. Will you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, so when the fire had happened, we had no government help for the first, I believe, 15 hours. So that was a big thing. It was other communities that really jumped in and helped us. There was no cell service to the people who stayed in Lytton, I was one that had, because I was on one of the safer parts, so I wasn't immediately evacuated, but the rest of my family was. So I had no source of contact with them. So that first, I believe, like 36 hours was very stressful, very scary. And then to hear afterwards that there was no government help afterward, like during the crisis, was something that really shouldn't have happened to Lytton, and in the future, I hope doesn't happen to anyone else.
Okay, great. Thanks. Well, I'll come back to you, obviously, and give you a chance to tell us a little bit more later on. Thanks a million. Ineza, will you tell us a little bit about how you got involved?
Thank you so much. Can I please confirm that you can still hear me out?
Yeah.
Okay. So for me, I do have a kind of similar story with the sunshine. So I am based in Rwanda, which is a small country located in Africa, but it's quite beautiful. I have been exposed to the climate change impact at a very younger age, because I do remember me waking up in the middle of the night to save my life, as intensive rainfall associated with wind destroyed my house ceiling, and then my bedroom was a little bit of a lake. But when I grew up, because I grew in a peri-urban area, I was able to go to school. I kind of forget that memory, because now I was like a younger girl who wanted to go pursue education. So I went to study like science, because I wanted to be an electrical engineer. So I did physics, mathematics, and chemistry in high school. I was quite good with my grades, so I was not a bad student in a sense. But when I finished my high school, I was watching the news on the television, and then I saw that one of the area in the rural side of my country were faced by erosion and flooding, and most of the affected population were women and children, because they are being forced to migrate from one place to another to save their life. So when I saw that news, I kind of had like a flashback of how I felt powerless, hopeless, when I woke up to find my bed not being a normal bed as I was supposed to be having. So that feeling of me remembering the climate anxiety I had, and all the trauma that I had at a very younger age, I decided to go to study something that will help me be able to protect my community. So the first thing that I came across was environment engineering, which was one of the courses offered in the Rwanda University. So when I was still a student, I knew that I had to be a little bit a kind of a solution maker, or like someone who's gonna bring a solution. So for that one, I was going to try to go in a path that I was not able, like try to see, because I was going to change myself to be better to protect my community. So leadership was one of the things that I thought of how to do with. So I embarked in the journey of how to become a leader. And I've been trying to be a kind of leader that was going to be serving the African community, but most especially for giving solution that will be working in my community, in our community, but also being able to serve. So all that combined, and the kind of education that I was having, I came to realize that the climate, there's a knowledge gap between what the youth wants to do in the climate change environment protection sector, the country vision of what they want the country to be doing, and also the vulnerability or the access of information in the community. So after doing a lot of research and Googling around with the benefits of using internet, I came to have like this concrete idea of what would be the first step, because I know I wanted to be part of the solution, but I was also sure that I was not the only one that will be able to do it. And we do have this proverb in I think in African language, where we say it's possible if you want to go fast. If you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. But my president add a third part, which is like it is possible to go fast and far together. So having that in mind, I started the Green Fighter, aiming to simply be a platform, like bringing the youth together so we can brainstorm, we can share knowledge, and then we can try to share like anything that we think could be a homegrown solution in the climate change and environment protection sector. So we started, it was quite so challenging, but I think on this day is quite of a thing that we are all proud to be part of, because we are able to contribute on the national level and international level in a way that we are constructing what would be a hopeful future for ourselves and for our children, because the current climate inaction or level of youth tokenism that is happening, or women exclusion in the process, is kind of not giving us the real hope of the future. But as being active stakeholders currently, give us like a kind of a sense of being a positive actor of change, which I think is quite something to strengthen on the longer run.
Fantastic. Thanks a million. It's brilliant. Comprehensive introduction there with lots of really interesting points about going fast and far together. And that I'm really interested in your analysis there of that gap between the kind of the knowledge, the vision that a government might have for the country, and the fact that communities may not have knowledge. They might have knowledge, but they might not have access to the kinds of knowledge they might need to hold government to account, which is the point that Swakwash was making. So we'll talk a bit more about all that later on. Brilliant, Ineza. Thanks a million. So Amy, can I come over and ask you the same question? Sorry, you're over here on my screen over there, so that's why I'm looking at you over there. So again, how did you get involved in all of this?
Yeah. So I was in green schools in primary school, which is kind of like an initiative in Ireland, for primary schools to get involved in the environment. And I think looking back on that now, I kind of knew what the environment was and had this connection with nature, which I think is good, and like turning off the tap and stuff. But I didn't really connect that to any bigger issue because we were so small and that's not what we were being taught. But my granddad did teach me how to like grow like our own food and stuff like that, and vegetables, which I think isn't really the type of knowledge that's being passed down anymore. So like looking back, that's quite an important like part of my story now. And then in second year, I joined Corla, which is Corla Nog is the Irish for essentially like a youth version of the county council, like the local council of politicians in our area. And I kind of joined that just before the pandemic hit. So we were meeting every single Saturday. Before it would have been once a month. So because we moved online, we were able to meet every Saturday. And we were working on mental health and stress. And I met lots of amazing people who I'm still like really active with now. And just last weekend, I was re-elected as the Cork County Corla chair for the second year. And then about kind of 6 months later, I joined the Climate Justice Programme with the NYCI, which is the National Youth Council of Ireland. And we joined as a group of 6 representing the YMCA, which are a youth organisation. And there was lots of other organisations like MOCRA, which represent young farmers. We had traveller organisations, all sorts of different types of groups, and about 6 in each like that. And we all came together and kind of shared our knowledge in different ways. And I think for me going into that, I kind of understood climate change in a basic way, and but I think I had more of an understanding that it kind of impacted everyone and almost like it impacted everyone the same, which I think is actually something we're hearing again with COVID, that it's impacting us all and we're all in it together, and we are, but not in the same way, because of like the way that people are marginalized in society today. So anyway, in this project, yeah, we kind of just learned about climate justice, and I didn't know what the climate justice together meant, the two words together actually meant. Just to having conversations for about like 4 months, I'd say, in these meetings. And the group I was in, we just learned so much just from talking to each other, and we were all coming from different places, and we got different people in to really like drag out what we were saying and have workshops and things like that. And we hosted webinars, and we did lots of projects and stuff ourselves. And like, when we realized how much we learned from just having a conversation and really connecting climate justice, which is essentially climate change, but how it connects to people, the social justice side of it, how much we learned from that, we decided to stay together. And the group of 6 that I was in, including myself in that like project, is now the Sustainable Sleepover Club, which is a podcast after the project ended. It's the podcast we created with the YMCA's help, and we've now recorded 15 episodes, and it's on most like music and podcast platforms, and including Spotify and iTunes. And essentially, Sustainable Sleepover Club sounds a bit weird, but essentially it's about the Sustainable Development Goals. And if you know about the Sustainable Development Goals, there are 17 goals, kind of created as a blueprint and a stepping stone towards a better future. And they contain everything from like no poverty and quality education to climate action. And I think that's really important, that all these different issues are completely linked and we cannot solve one without the other. And we have different guests on. And then the second part of every podcast episode is that we just chat about what we've learned and where we're at, what happened this week, what have we learned recently, what did we find interesting from the speaker. So it's like a sleepover, essentially. It's like a chat at a sleepover. And that's the idea. And then bit by bit, I joined Spun Out, which is a youth information website, and I do writing with them, Youth Against Racism and Inequalities in Ireland, Fridays for Future. And now I'm involved not just in Ireland and Cork, but internationally, and I'm an editor with the Fridays for Future newsletter and just lots of other projects. And I'm in TY this year, which is like a very activity-led kind of school year, less of an academic year. So yeah, I hope to continue looking busy.
Yeah, sorry, fantastic, Amy. Thanks a million. You pretty much preempted my next question for you, which was to tell us a bit more about the podcast. Could you just briefly tell us what kind of people do you have speaking? I really like the idea, by the way, of the sleepover thing, and I'm sure you have lots of people listening in because of that. So who's it for, and what kind of, just very briefly, what kind of people do you have contributing to it?
Yeah, definitely. So it's kind of aimed at young people, again, with the kind of sleepover idea, like not using like jargons, anything that we don't think people would understand, we explain, but like not talking down to people, just making it really accessible for all young people. And we have a transcript of every single episode, so it's there in writing the entire episode. And the kind of guests that we get on, we pick a goal as well for each episode and just explain one of the 17 goals and put in a couple of statistics, and then obviously we have the sleepover section, and within it starts the episode with the guest, and I'll interview the guest as the host. So we've had people like Andy Hamilton, who has a PhD in peace, Alicia O'Sullivan, who was the education officer and is now the environmental officer at UCC and is representing UCC, the college in Cork, at COP26 coming soon. We've had Mitzi Janelle Tan. She's a climate justice activist in the Philippines. We've had people talking about mental health and disability, education, like all these different issues are just so interlinked. So yeah, we've had amazing guests.
Brilliant.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
Excellent, Amy. Thanks a million. Sunshine, can I move over to you if you don't mind? Would you mind telling us a little bit about, I know you're on the Youth Advisory Panel for the Canadian Commission for UNESCO. Tell us what that's about and what's involved with that.
Yeah, so I'm actually only in my first few months.
Oh,
We've just got started. I have gotten an email just the other day that I am one of the sub-working groups that I'm in. It will be in governance with the youth advisory group. But it's still, everything's still working through, and I just got, accepted beginning of summer, and with the summer months, everything kind of slowed down, but everything's going back into full speed. So hopefully this next few weeks, I'll be learning more about what I'll be doing within that.
Okay, great. Could you tell us about what's happening in relation to Lytton? You mentioned it earlier on in the fire. So what's happening, I suppose, what kind of activism is happening around all of that now?
Right now, a lot of the youth and the citizens of Lytton are still kind of a bit in survival mode. With the winter coming, we're still trying to find housing for everyone. Over the summer, a lot of people were in tents. So everyone's still trying to get a grounding after everything that's happened. So, but there's a lot of talk now on what's going to be happening within next year, especially since it's going to take at least 3 to 5 years for Lytton to be up and coming halfway.
Yeah, right. Okay. Thanks very much. And Ineza, I was looking at I mentioned it to you earlier on. I was looking at your website, the Loss and Damage Youth Coalition. Will you tell people what that's about? It's really interesting.
Oh yeah, sure. Thank you. So the Loss and Damage Youth Coalition is the initiative that I was involved in, kind of the co-creation part of it in the summer of 2020, because when the COVID pandemic struck the world, we as youth who are party delegate who are following the negotiation under COP26, we came to realize that even if the COVID is a real threat, especially in the global south, but the effect of the climate change impacts are quite enormous, because we did have some cases where in a country, the population were obliged to move, ruining every guideline about COVID, because the climate change impact were quite enormous, and there was no way you can tell them save yourself from the COVID if they're going to die from the climate change impact. So after realizing the gap of the climate injustice that was happening, so me along with my colleagues, we started the Loss and Damage Youth Coalition. So loss and damage is basically mean what happened when we can no longer adapt to climate change or mitigate the climate change. Adaptation means simply finding a way to live with the current climate change impact. So for example, how to practice smart agriculture, like all those things that can allow the community to cope with the climate change rising. And mitigation is a way of going toward clean development while your economic growth, while we're doing clean developments, like green energy, renewable energy, so other things that can allow us to keep having a good, stable life, but by also protecting the environment. So loss and damage is what happened in between. And depending on the fact that the global leaders, especially from a developed country, were denying or were having like a big, huge climate inaction, that really leads to us living the climate change impact or the loss and damage at a higher extent right now. So what we did, we have like four pillars in our engagement. The first one was to share the story of the lived experience of loss and damage from the frontline youth in different countries. As because our coalition is having more than 300 members from more than 45 countries. So we do have a platform where they can share their story or their concern, anything they want to share with the world in terms of the loss and damage. And the other part we have is pressuring global leaders. So we pressure them by giving them a check message, be like, even if you're going toward like a good ambition on climate, we want you to really consider the climate equity in terms of access of solution on the ground. So we do this in form of sending open letter. We send an open letter to the COP26 presidency, the United States of America, the European Union, and we currently also have the COP26 statement. So a kind of what the youth want to see happening at COP26 in order for us to be like the COP26 was a success. The other part we have is on training, because also even if we want to achieve climate equity, there's also a need to train or like to give information, access information, especially to the youth, to better understand on how to hold the leaders accountable, and also follow the system to ensure that we are going toward what is a safe plan. So we do trainings. And then the last but not least, we do everything with communication, because everything we need to be doing, we need to ensure that it's going to reach our target audience at the right time, in the right moment. So we have a website, we use YouTube, Instagram, and now we are considering also trying to use more frequently TikTok, because even the younger generation need to understand the level of climate change impact, the loss and damage, and what can be their contribution to achieve a climate just world. So basically that will be what I can share for right now. And and also at COP26, we are going to send the delegation. The delegation will be having a kind of, they'll be like sending an eye in every negotiation, and like saying like to global leaders, be like, make sure you do consider like the youth voice in your plan, and also communicating with other youth, be like, for example, this is the plan that our elders are having, and it's not fitting what we want to see. So what can we do? Maybe we can have like a strategic plan to ensure that things are moving forward smoothly, in a sense.
That's brilliant. I was going to ask you actually, because I wanted to move on to the COP26, and I wanted to ask each of you what your kind of priorities are, or what do you want governments to agree and to do arising out of COP26. So maybe we'll start back with you, if that's okay, Ineza. Will you say something about your COP26 statement? And I noticed like the whole thing about loss and damage is about governments taking responsibility for their continued emissions. And as you said, I suppose the loss and damage that people are experiencing, and that governments kind of pay for that and take responsibility for it. Governments, in particular in the global north, or the heavy consuming countries of the world. And you talked about equity. Will you tell us a little bit more about what exactly what's in your COP26 statement, if you can tell us some of the key points that are in it?
Yes, I can share some of the key parts. And first, we do recognize that the current climate change, the rise of our planet, and we did have an IPCC report recently, mm-hmm. and it really states that our planet is on an emerging red zone. We're really in the red zone. And when you look into the calculation, the Global South community did less in the contribution, because most of the development from the Global North are the ones who are playing a major role in increasing or warming our planet. So what happened in the negotiation is that the developed countries are not really fully committed in doing everything that they can to ensure that we are able to have a proper future for everyone. And in the past, the loss and damage was kind of being considered as as a point that not everyone is willing to discuss on, because the climate change impacts were happening mainly in the global south, which tend to be, it was kind of not a priority point in the negotiation, and no one was wanting to hear it coming. But 2021 is the year that even the USA, even the EU country, everyone is heated. Like the flooding happening in China, the heat wave in the US, the flooding in Germany. So everyone is at risk. And I think this kind of event really showcased the fact, even if we tend to think like we live in a different kind of world, like two separate worlds, we are all on one boat, on one planet. And there's no way, like if one side will sink, another one will still rise. So we sink or we rise together. There's no way to separate all those two. So our COP26 statement really first requires to the COP, the Secretary of the UNFCCC, to recognize loss and damage as a priority, which means can be included in the agenda for COP26 and beyond. In the way that finance, adaptation, mitigation are kind of the priority point in the negotiation. The second point is that we ask for the establishment of the loss and damage champion to really build the trust between developing and developed country, so they can have a common understanding of what is really needed to be as an active solution on the ground. Because the current situation is that there's no such a thing as a common trust. And I think it's a matter of having discussion and listening to meet the needs on the ground in order to come up with the proper solution. And the third demand was to tax polluters, because we know who cause more of the global warming. So we know which companies, especially the fossil fuel companies. So we want to advocate for establishment of a carbon tax, or taxing the polluters, which would be a mean to also ensure that people are being now mindful in using natural resources. And we also want the establishment of a loss and damage finance that is ready to serve the community. Because currently in the developing country, when the climate change impact hits, so the small country, they already have like a small GDP, but they need to use their existing GDP to recover from the climate change impact, which means if the poor countries are paying for the climate change impact, when they're the one who contributed less and who have less fund, research, and technology to really address that one. And the other point that we did demand was to establish a loss and damage youth advisory committee within the UNFCCC, so that each solution that is going to be coming up, there will be a kind of an advisory consultation between the elders and the youth, so that we ensure that we are all working together as active stakeholders, because loss and damage is the biggest climate injustice that our generation is facing. So it only makes sense for us to be included in a small, big, large, any type of discussion. We need to be present. So that would be briefly our demand.
Brilliant, thanks a million. So do you have any Irish members of that as a matter of interest?
I think not, but I can check clearly.
Yeah, no, there's no need, but it prompts me, I guess, because it's quite comprehensive. It's very much building on the kind of thing that you were saying there earlier on, Amy, about the Sustainable Development Goals and the intersection and the links between equality, inequality, poverty, control and power of corporations, and the lack of action of governments. So it might be something for any climate activists, youth-eyed climate activists who are listening, that they may be very interested in participating in your loss and damage coalition. It's really comprehensive. I had a look at it earlier on, your calls. So for Sakwash and Amy, what about you and these talks that the governments are having, these COP26 talks? What are your hopes for the talks? Of course, they're not just governments who are participating, they're corporations and civil society and others as well. what are your priorities? What would you like to see happening? Either of you, whoever, Sakwash, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I can. I would like to see more on the frontline protectors of water and land, because they're the ones out there protecting the water, protecting the land, getting dirty and getting hurt from the governments for keeping our waters clean and keeping our deforestation from happening. So it'd be really cool to see from corporations, COP26, the corporations and governments that will be participating in COP26, not only acknowledging that, but amplifying those voices. And then, yeah, having governments and corporations take accountability for the rise of emissions, because we're only 8 years away now from 2030, and that was the emissions we're supposed to be lowering by then to reach that net zero by 2050. We had 15 years. Now we only have 8, and we're still hearing these same empty promises from our governments. So taking more accountability on really truly trying to become net zero by 2050. And Amy, I'll pass it along to you.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks a million, Sakwash.
Yeah, I think the biggest point for me around COP26 is that the governments who are there, and even like a lot of the activists and organizations and companies that are there, are going to be from like the global north and very privileged, making profits off of people who are like most impacted by the climate crisis now. And I think to even recognize that divide and inequality, we need like climate justice, because essentially climate change is caused by the same like system and people who benefit from patriarchy, colonization, capitalism. And I think we need climate justice to mitigate climate change, which is in itself like an inequality that perpetrates all of these systems. But on top of that, climate justice also includes reparations, and in itself mitigation is a reparation, but also looking into like, you know, loss and damage and how can people adapt, because people are already suffering with climate change. It's not enough to just stop it from getting worse, because people are being so impacted now. And also looking at like in countries like Ireland, and the people who are kind of surviving off of, you know, fossil fuels and different lifestyles at the moment, that can't just afford to change their entire lives. And we don't have the infrastructure right now, because of people who have been marginalized in our country as well, that those people are supported and that we have a just transition in Ireland. So I think climate justice and linking all these different social issues is so important to COP. And I think the way to do that is really to meaningfully listen to the people most marginalized. I think that's so, so important, because otherwise the action won't be for them, and that's the kind of action we need.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks a million to all of you. Such really interesting points. Sorry, I just see that some questions are coming in here from those who are listening to us. We can't see them, but they can see us. So, and I'd like to use it as an opportunity to invite others to bring in any questions. So I'll just hold off for a few minutes. If anybody has any questions, please share them with us, and I'd be delighted to put them to our 3 really interesting speakers. One of the things that strikes me is that I guess, you know, for those of us who are a little bit older, like me, I've been listening to and hearing about climate change, about climate justice, about these kinds of COP meetings for many, many years. And I'm really struck, Ineza, by what you said earlier on, that it's really only when it hits home that often those governments or corporations, or kind of the interests in the parts of the world that have been consuming over consuming and exploiting nature for so long, it's only then that they actually can, sit up and take heed. And I was really, really struck the other day by Greta Thunberg's talk about the blah, blah, blah. And this morning I listened back to one of our earlier First Wednesday events where we talked about the Green New Deal and about this importance that you mentioned there, Amy, of climate justice. And at that First Wednesday, and I'd really recommend anybody to go back and listen to it. We had three really interesting and brilliant speakers, Sean McCabe of Task's Climate Justice Centre, and Lorna Gold, who's also now of Maynooth University and previously worked with Trócaire, and Conor McCabe, who does a lot of work on kind of capitalism and the big economic structures. And they really brought out key points about, very similar to what you're saying there, about the importance of tackling kind of interests and those whose interests are served by keeping things the way they are. And what really strikes me, sorry now, I'm going on a little bit, is just that there's so much rhetoric about change, but actually very little seems to change, or I know things do change, but often the rhetoric is not backed up with real commitment, and the commitment to finance that you mentioned earlier on, the commitment to take on the powerful interests, those who are destroying the water and the biodiversity and nature, as you mentioned earlier on, Sakwash. And I just wanted to put this point to you that Sean McCabe was saying recently that he has been working with Yongo, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, it's the Children and Youth Constituency to the UN FCCC, which is the UN framework on convention around climate change, through which COP is organized. Basically arguing for the need for a decision on youth human rights and climate action. In the 30 years of the COP, there's never been a decision focused on children. And I hear from what you were saying, Inez, earlier on there, about the importance in the loss and damage of having youth voices, of people who have been most affected by climate change, most badly affected, but also young people actually having much more of a say in all of these processes. So how do you think that we can, or ye can, kind of get young people, much more young people involved, and how can governments be, I suppose, called on to listen to the Fridays for Future protests and the other, activists around the world, and not dismiss the really important points that you're making? Any thoughts on all of that? Anybody? Yeah, please. Thanks.
I can share what I think. So first, there's a need for those leaders or the people who are supposed to listen to us to quit their mindset of thinking us that we are youth activists in a sense, or that we're doing it as a hobby. Because it's not a hobby, it's that we are uncertain of what the future we are having, and there's no hope for going to pursue an education if we can see any way we are going to be able to live with that one. So that's why you will see many youth are being active in the climate change, because the climate change or Mother Nature is what holds life on Earth. So if there's no Mother Nature, so there's no such a thing as life on Earth. And so the first thing would be for them to quit picturing us as youth and listen to really the concrete message we are having. Because maybe we are too young to understand the climate politics that they're using. And then for one reason, I don't know why they do have that one, because climate change is not such a thing that need to be politically driven, because it's a matter of life, it's a matter of the living. So when you put politics in it, it's become a little bit too stupid, if I can say, and it becomes too stressful for no reason, because it should be simple. If a community is being hit by climate change, there's another part who contributed too much for that one to be happening. So it's only logic. So they need to pay. It's like you break it, you pay it. It's kind of that kind of the same logic, but they want to take it a little bit too political. And because we also do understand their politics, because we have youth, as you say, there's the Yungo, who is which is the youth constituency under the UNFCCC. And also in the loss and damage, we do have some young diplomats in climate change. So yes, we do understand their politics, and most of their tactic to block any progress or any way to achieve an equality format of having a concrete action on the ground is being strategically blocked with, I don't know how to say, it's like they come up with a good strategy of something that's been signed in 1993 or like very long time ago, and then they want to be like the baseline of what is going to be our current situation. And for me, I'm like, do you guys know we are in 2021, that this is a reality? So something that happened in the past is not a baseline for something to happen right now, because the IPCC is present, right? So it's there. So you know, like the extent of how we are going. So I'm like, and also like, I have a colleague of mine, she just say like, in the negotiation about climate change, parties shouldn't be negotiating, because negotiation is too political, and our climate is not waiting for the political will to be in line. So that's why we need the political urgency. And the youth are the really drive to achieve a political urgency in every country, especially if because we do come together. Like, for example, in our coalition, we have members from the Global North and from the Global South, and we are all advocating for one single thing, which is achievement of climate justice. And we do know, like, the Global North has the part to play, and the Global South also has the part to play. We all need only to come together. And the youth, luckily, are the one who understand that one. But the older generation, I don't know what's happened when they grow up, in a sense, because I don't know, like, they kind of missed it in class or anything. So it's like, yeah, that would be what I can say right now, in a sense.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks a million. We'll come back to you in a few minutes. Amy or Sakwash, what do you think? And it actually came through as a question as I was asking you. Somebody said here, I have it here on my phone, amazing speakers. Thank you so much for all your inputs. Sunshine, you raised the issue of holding corporations more accountable. Can the panel speakers reflect on how best we can do this as activists? And I think, Ineza, you've been talking about that, and it feeds very much into the question that I asked you. And the other question that came in really is about, can you share your thoughts? And it's very similar, so that's why I'm saying it now, really, just telling you that people are listening and very engaged in what you're saying. Can you tell us how we can build strong solidarity networks across borders? So Amy or Sakwash, you might want to comment on either of those, or both, or neither, or whatever. Amy, we'll start with you. Yeah.
Yeah, I think like a very big point that you're making is around COP. And I think that, you know, whether it's different corporations, banks, and also world leaders themselves have a lot of interest in fossil fuels, and where a lot of their profits and the economy is coming from is constant production, and it's inherently causing all these divides and inequalities. And I think that, like, a big thing to focus on with COP is that these world leaders are still going to have these interests, but we as people can still hold them accountable. We can still say, you know, that actually in terms of engaging other people, that the world is clearly changing. And Ineza has brought up those like examples of just even in the last year of extreme weather events, but the world is changing, and we can change it for the better and in a way that is livable, or we can let it change for us. And I think that's the big thing with world leaders that they're missing, that their profits are going to dry up too, because it's all drying up, you know. And like, even where their even money is coming from. I think that's like a really big focus, but I don't think that COP should only be about money and trying to play into world leaders. I think the main focus needs to be like, you can't negotiate life and you shouldn't compromise with the science, because like I've had like our own like ministers say to us that, you know, with the climate bill at the moment in Ireland, that, you know, they're walking the line between the economy and profits and climate change. You're like, there's no line. It's very clear, and every single fraction of a degree matters. I think that's a really big focus with COP, is that climate justice and centering people, centering our action. I don't think that like we can only focus on the negotiations and the world leaders and the economy. I think we really need to like think about, like someone in the comments was talking about coalition and talking about how it's collective power and it's people coming together for change. Like that is our hope, and that is how we put pressure on world leaders. And I think that's where our change with COP is coming from, and that's what I'm like geared up for around COP, is not the actual negotiation, but I think like people are going to make history coming together. I've had so much media trying to contact activists around COP, and I think it's going to bring a lot more people into the conversation, and I think that's the exciting thing about COP, and I think that's where our change is going to come from.
Yeah, thanks a million. Brilliant. Sakwash, do you want to comment on all of this?
Yeah. So I think for so long, corporations have made such a profit on the climate crisis, and by exploiting all our resources, and we can't continue at this rate that we're going. So governments need to start, organizations need to start amplifying youth voices so that governments can start hearing that there is a lot of youth saying like, this needs to stop. And it'd be in everyone's best interest to actually start listening, because even with the older generations, we're all going to be here for the next who knows how long, but the climate crisis really does choose how long it'll continue to happen, especially with no resources. We can't, I'm sorry, my light's really, I'm blinding out here. With no resources, we're not going to be able to continue on this planet. And some billionaires have shown already that they will leave this planet if they can. And I think that's very concerning.
Very concerning and very indicative. You know, like you're talking here and I'm listening and I'm just thinking, I'm writing down so much stuff and I'm thinking, I wish so many people could hear what you have to say. Ineza, you started off in answer to that question by saying, don't be looking at us as youth activists. And that is like such a really, really, really crucial point, because so often people are dismissed just because, so you're youth activists. It's like, oh yeah, it's like, okay, well, you know, you don't really know the serious stuff. And yet you're making the really important point that it's so clear. Like, it doesn't need to be complicated in the sense of a complicated message, it's clear message. And Amy, I was struck by your point that, you know, this thing about a line, that it's always a line. And I very often think that line is very much about, we'll say the right thing and we will do the right thing, but we'll do it in the future because climate change is coming. It's like, you know, it's like something that's going to happen in the future. Even there's still that kind of a sense, I think, really. And the other thing I was struck by there, what you just said, Sunshine Sakwash, about that companies are making profit on the climate change, that it's actually using it as an opportunity to make more profit. And that point about escaping the planet. So like putting all that resources into trying to find a way out. It really does hit me so often. Sometimes, I'll be honest with you, I get very despondent about the way things are in the world, as I'm sure you do, probably more so even. And it affects me very, very deeply, the kind of at a very deep level, a sense of sometimes hopelessness at at what's happening and the way people's lives are being messed with, and the way that biodiversity is being destroyed around, I suppose through particular types of agricultural policies or whatever it is. And it really strikes me that the more active one might be, the more likely one might be to have some kind of hope, because at least you might feel, well, I'm doing something. I know this can work. We can shape things. And rather than kind of feeling like it's all totally overwhelming, I wonder if you have any comments on that. Amy, are you going to say something? You are great. Thanks.
I think for me, like you were saying, the hope doesn't come from kind of, I think we often use hopeful in this way of like the future after it'll be grand, like, especially maybe in Ireland, we kind of think of hope as this nice thing and it's fine. But actually hope for me is definitely action. It's doing something. And like that could be in a small way in your life, but it's definitely with something like climate change. Hope doesn't come from just sitting down and convincing yourself that it'll be fine. It's about doing something. And I think like what you were saying about how when you learn about this, it's so overwhelming. And I think for me, within that action, I've also found so many communities and friends and amazing people who are both working on it with me, which I think makes you feel so much better, because you know that more people care about this and that they want to change the world as well. But also that, there are more, you're working on it in a bigger amount, and that it's more powerful that way. And you also people just to hold you and keep you accountable and to support you and to learn from and just to talk to. And I think that that's really important, that we have that community for number but also to support you. And I think that you're like, that's where hope comes from community and action and community action.
Cool. Well done. Thanks. Inez or Sakwash, would you like to say anything about that hope thing? Or
I could just only add to what Amy say, that hope also come with having tangible result, or like a tangible or clear plan of how things are going to happen. Because if it is hope that is only in the sky and that cannot be transmitted or like explained in a way that's gonna make sense, especially for like frontline community or developing country, or people are being marginalized in the system. So that's not hope, that's simply a fantasy. And we don't want a fantasy anymore, because in the past decades, like 3 or 4, like all people, especially in the developing country, were living in a fantasy that all people are really caring, they do understand. But it's only after a few years that it was quite clear that one part doesn't care, one part doesn't understand. So it kind of broke the trust and the hope that you're having. So whichever hope that you're going to be having in the future, it should be clearly outlined strategically in a way that makes sense. So for example, if we are going to promise school, for example, let's build the schools that the community see, like the school available, now I can go to school. So don't be like, let's all children go to school, and then forget that there's some community who are not able to go to school because when erosion is happening or intensive rainfall is happening, their path from home to school are being destroyed, so they can no longer go to school. So that kind of example. So like every SDG is kind of linked. So for it to make sense, it should be really considering all the gap, so that the hope that we want to create for our future can be really transmittable and understandable for everyone, everywhere, in any place. So that will be one thing I can add on. Thanks.
Great, really great. Thanks a million. We have just 2 comments coming in, just because I want to wrap up. And what I really want to ask you, I'll read these for you now as well. And if anybody wants to make comment on them, please do. But I'd like to ask you before we wrap up, just to think about say 2 or 3 things that you'd like those who are listening to this or who are watching us now, what would you like them to actually do practically to read, to I don't know, join you in some kind of a protest, to write, to do something? What would you like them to do? And while you're thinking about those 1 or 2 things, anything at all, doesn't matter. A question has come in about what the panelists think about pursuing governments through the courts who are not meeting their climate targets. Have you any thoughts on that? And then there's a comment just to say, thanks so much. Brilliant speakers, incredible activists. Thanks so much for sharing your thoughts and recommendations. So any comments on the pursuing governments through courts, if you have any thoughts on that, or maybe we'll start with that and then we'll come back to we'll finish up with the last kind of action points. Sakwash, any ideas on that one? Am I right in thinking you might have thoughts on that? Maybe you.
Yeah, I know personally I would love to bring governments to court, whether it's my own or helping with other countries. That is such a huge task though, especially for youth, especially if younger youth haven't gone to school and don't have like that lawyer degree and not having access to a lawyer. So it's also having accessibility to those resources that you need, which could be harder for some people. I know I definitely don't have a lawyer, but that would be something to see, especially going into the future, seeing more youth taking on governments, especially within the court system.
And from somebody who's on the older side, like being led by youth in terms of the activism that those of us who are older and maybe who have that kind of access to lawyers or to people who have those specializations to kind of to work with, to partner with, back to that collaboration and working together, but rather than kind of necessarily being led by older generations, we're actually being led into this area by you guys, which is, and I don't mean that in any patronizing way. And I really, really want to be very careful about that, because I think an awful lot of the language, I really agree with you, Ineza, a lot of the language around kind of climate activism that a lot of younger people are involved in has a kind of a patronizing tone, aren't you great? And I don't hear that coming through from what people have said either. And I definitely don't want to perpetuate it, but I do feel that we need to kind of get going a lot more than we have been, I suppose, at a very basic bottom line. So thanks for that. And any other kind of action points that you'd like those who are listening to take account of or to do? Sakwash, do you want to start with that? Anything you'd like people to do?
Yeah, I think for people who are in a position of power, amplifying youth voices is a very big thing that should start happening more and more. And opening spaces at those tables to make decisions, because it is their future. The future is ours and we're seeing it slip away. So opening those positions, opening the table, giving a seat, but making it a safe place for youth as well. Because I know personally as an Indigenous youth, there are not many safe Indigenous places for myself to feel comfortable on talking on such big comments or concepts. So opening it up, but making it a safe place for youth to speak up.
Great, thanks very much. A comment has just come in as well, just to again compliment you, but also that point that you made, Ineza, earlier on about going far and fast together and how important that is. Yeah. Okay, so Amy or Ineza, do you want to say anything about anything practical that you'd like people to do before we finish up?
Yeah, sure.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. I think, like, also, if you want to learn more, like the Sustainable Sleepover Club, I've learned so much, like, from the guests and the other people I get to chat to. Yeah, and I do think it's like a very accessible resource as well. I think as well, like join a community, join other people who are getting active because they're there. I know they're there. And there's, whether you're remote, you can like, work with people online, or you can meet them in person if you're near them. And even if you can't give as much because we're all in different like levels of privilege and safety, you can give something. And I do think everyone can do like their little thing. And even if it's only your perspective, that's really, really important, rather than maybe your labor, especially if you're someone who's marginalized. But if you have that privilege, like I know I have more privilege of more time and more like safety, and I think that's really important. And also just around COP, and like we're always hearing around COP, like get active, but like I think that goes for like the really, really local, like I do a lot with my local newspaper, and I think just having conversations, because like the person you're closest to is going to listen to you more than they're going to listen to someone miles and miles away they've never met, even though you might be saying the same thing, as well as like, nationally and globally. And like at the same time, I work with people, alongside people who are most impacted by the climate crisis, and writing for international like forums and platforms. And I think that's really important as well, and organizing a protest or going to a protest, or because I've had such amazing youth workers behind me, like I think understanding the power of your voice in whatever way works for you. So yeah, I think there's always a way to get active, to learn, and to join a community, join other people.
Great, thanks very much, Amy. Ineza, last word to you.
Okay, thank you so much. So for me, I would say the call of action first would be like join the Loss and Damage Youth Coalition, because it is an opportunity to share your voice, because we aim to increase a platform where youth can share their story, and then we can make it quite available for everyone. And then we do use different language. So language is not a barrier. So as long as you have your story and you want to share, because we want to promote your voice, your story, so that it can amplify the world to see that the climate change impact is our reality. And the second thing would be, as you know, we have our COP26 statement, and we are aiming to collect as many signs on as possible from especially youth organizations. So if you want to sign, or like you can sign or you can share, you can have the open letter on our website. And if you have any question, please feel free to email our email. It's under on our website, which is like basically Loss and Damage Youth Coalition @gmail.com. So it's quite easy. We don't want complicated platforms or like acronyms. Then the third is that let's all work together and don't give up, because if we give up, there's no future for each and everyone. I know it's quite challenging, but challenges are simply means for us to stay focused in order to achieve the real purpose. And our real purpose that we are striving for is a better future. And I think everyone wants to go to a future, right? Because if we don't, we are all gonna die tomorrow or after tomorrow. So there's a need to really act together.
Okay, brilliant. Listen, thanks so much to the three of you. And there's lots of comments coming in. Somebody recommending the Sleepover Club podcast, and I definitely will be sharing your COP26 statement and asking people to sign up and to support. And like I'm really struck by lots of different points that you made about holding governments and corporations to account, about if you break it, you pay for it, and accepting responsibility, and that it's not a hobby. This is not a hobby for people. This is about real hope based on action, not based on some kind of fantasy. So like really you've left us with a lot, and this video will be available for people to watch and for you to share, and for us and those who are participating. I recognize a lot of names. I haven't named people because just for kind of protection purposes, but I recognize a lot of names of people who are listening, all of whom have platforms, who are very committed to these issues, and who will no doubt share the very many points that you have made, very many brilliant points that you've made this evening. So thanks a million. It's been a privilege to spend the last hour and a bit with you, and I wish you all the very best. And if ever you're interested in participating in or contributing to or joining us at the Department of International Development in Maynooth University, I'd love to hear more from you. Thanks a million. So thanks everyone for joining us this evening, and thanks in particular to Colov for organising it, and to Aga, who has recently joined Colov, and for whom this is her first Wednesday to organise, and I think she's done a brilliant job. So thanks very much, everyone.